In many parts of the world, most COVID restrictions are gone. But in China, this remains the strategy. Lockdowns, such as this one in Shanghai, and any change of course is being resisted.
If we chose to lay down now, our efforts will have come to nothing. We unswervingly insist on zero COVID.
Zero COVID means lockdowns, it means mass testing, and it means anyone who tests positive going to a government-run quarantine centre. Also in Shanghai, we've seen officials in hazmat suits disinfecting the streets and fences to stop people leaving their flats. And we've seen this too.
Electronic magnetic alarms are going to be placed on the front doors of some people in places where they have tested positive to try and monitor them to make sure they don't leave.
And if that's in Shanghai, elsewhere, more than 20 other Chinese cities are under some form of lockdown. And in the capital, Beijing, people know they could be next. There's been panic buying after new COVID cases sparked rumours of a lockdown. That hasn't happened, but millions of residents have been tested. Now, this zero COVID approach has saved lives during the pandemic. In China, there have been fewer than 5,000 recorded COVID deaths. In the US, it's close to 1 million. And the Chinese government is keen to make that comparison.
China has 1.4 billion people, which is much more than all 30 countries of the West. But in the past 2 years, the death toll of COVID in China is only less than 1% of that in the West.
But China's zero COVID commitment may come at a cost. The International Monetary Fund has cut its growth forecast for the Chinese economy this year to 4.4%. China's target is 5.5%. And if China's growth slows, that could affect us all.
The lockdown situation in China is not only a threat to the Chinese economy, but the world economy as well, very much including the UK. Shanghai is home to the world's largest container port, which is now hobbled. The fear is of disruption to global supply chains, which are already severely stressed.
Those supply chains take goods from China to the rest of the world. And the warning from the head of one of Europe's busiest ports is blunt. He told Bloomberg, "We expect a bigger mess than last year. It will have a negative impact, and a big negative impact for the whole of 2022. There's pressure on supply chains, there's pressure on China's COVID policy, and that pressure is coming from these figures. At the beginning of March, there were 300 confirmed cases a day. Now, 2 months later, it's close to 30,000 a day. And that rise is being driven by the Omicron variant. We know it's highly transmissible. But there's another factor too, vaccines. 51% of over 80s have had 2 doses, but just 20% have had a third booster dose. Because of this, some of China's elderly remain vulnerable to COVID, and China's healthcare system is vulnerable too.
The real problem in China is not that people are dying, but that they might die, and that the disease, the infections might spread, because outside the bigger cities like Beijing and Shanghai, healthcare is borders often on the rudimentary.
Healthcare, vaccine rates, Omicron, these are all used as arguments for zero COVID. But this is about politics too.
They've been touting for a long time that this is a sign of, the superiority of China's political system compared with the West. It would be really damaging for them politically, really, to see that undermined and to see deaths rising.
All of which helps to explain why the state-run Global Times has concluded that dynamic zero COVID policy is the only way out of the current complex situation. But not everyone agrees this is the only way. Chinese social media is tightly controlled, but videos have emerged of protests like this one in Shanghai. And then this is a confrontation as police force people out of their homes. Their apartment block is being turned into a quarantine centre. Now though, for whatever reasons, China's policy has shifted a little. Here's Robin Brandt again.
It's not aiming for absolute zero COVID now. What it's aiming for is something it calls societal zero COVID. So no cases springing up outside of quarantine centres.
More significant shifts appear unlikely though, not least because this autumn President Xi will seek an unprecedented third term in power, and COVID is part of the equation.
This is very closely associated with President Xi on his political legacy that managed to create a zero-COVID society. And the Chinese population expect a society that is COVID-free.
In time, the virus may ensure that expectation isn't met. But in the short term, it's one of the reasons why the world is going in one direction on COVID and China is going in another.